Anish once brought light to the world, uncorrupted by arcane magics and false gods. But they fell because they were not strong enough to resist the temptations and do what needed to be done. We are. With our missionaries and our conquistadors, we will put Efoqar on the righteous path. Evelyn Wheatblower, Bishop of Somberpine, 2991 AC. As people fled from the worsening effects of the comet's impact on Erlasora, especially before the rivers reformed in the desert, many came west by sea. Some came to Bosik. Many others settled on the southeast coast of Clausen. These human settlers would be the foundation of what would become Terra de los Justos. In the wake of the cataclysm, during the Illithid invasion, the human empire of Anish brought huge amounts of troops and material to the island of Bosik as a staging area for the fight in eastern Clausen. Many of the people ended up staying after the Illithids were driven back to the monolith, adding to the increased populations of humans in the area. Bosik would fall with the retreat of Anish and devolve into competing tribes, eventually smaller proto-states that would occasionally fight amongst themselves. Other times it would raid the Nandria Empire, and sometimes work as mercenaries for Nandria, and others would be taken as slaves. Regardless of how they interacted with the Empire, many would make their way west in the search of better farmland than can be found in Terra de los Justos. This is how many humans came to be in the area that Kenur would come to dominate. With the elves weakening and hastening the fall of Nandria, Slovia, the first of Bosik, attacked from the east with an alliance of her fellow counts and countesses. With the increase in her power and influence, instead of continuing the conquest, she returned to Bosik and united it under her rule, becoming its first monarch. But her victory was not complete. Several of her opponents would escape to the mainland and found kingdoms of their own. There was the Kingdom of Flowers to the west, the Kingdom of the Sea in the south, the Kingdom of the Winds in the central coast, the Kingdom of the Sky in the north, and in the landlocked middle was the Kingdom of the Mountains. These 6 kingdoms would spend the next few centuries in shifting alliances, trying to gain the upper hand. Many marriages would take place between these royal families and the families of Kenur, particularly the Zofia, who would use these connections to bring in foreign fighters from this region to help their own struggles in Kenur. Eventually, the Sultan of Al Sadan would seek overseas territories and use the excuse of reuniting lost brethren in the area and invade. Avoiding Bosik, Al Sadan would conquer most of the mainland, with the exception of the Mountain Kingdom. While the region would greatly benefit from inclusion in the Sultan's lands, the reaction to the conquest manifested itself in a distrust of the pluralism of ideas that the Sultan's kingdom represented. A distrust that has continued to this day and morphed into full prejudice and dogmatic adherence. After 2 centuries of foreign rule, the region, minus Bosik, was united under the rule of the Mountain Kingdom, who, after freeing their people, declared that justice had been served and rechristened the land Terra de los Justos. By this point, most of the population was human and sought to recreate the glories of Anish. Most of what Anish did was without arcane magics, relying instead on the divine and pure human tenacity. While they would later use arcane magics, this was after the world suffered from the cataclysm, and this right before their fall. The conclusions were that their ungodliness led them to their final destruction. It also didn't help that their previous conquerors were dualists worshipping Vitin, a deity of good, and Nitmis, deity of evil, that also practiced the arcane arts. This led to Terra de los Justos to reject arcane magic and gave rise to the new Vitanist cult, a group of monotheists that believed in the supremacy of the deity of good. While Bossk was more tolerant and open, it began to lag behind due to not having had the benefits of being conquered by Al-Sadan. To make up for this, it tried to get a foothold overseas and establish trading posts and colonies. When this started to show benefits, Terra de los Justos followed suit. As both of them grew more powerful, they would fight several small but inconclusive wars. In the end, it was decided they would unite their kingdoms through marriage and prosper equally. Terra de los Justos quickly began to dominate the relationship and sent its inquisitors to help bring Bossk into the fold. Bossk's colonies were left to fend for themselves, though none outside of the court's innermost circle can say why exactly. The wealth that came back from the southern hemisphere also allowed for the Justos to become the dominant wing of their family over that in Kenya as well. With their newfound power, they began to slip more and more into the monotheist camp, with the idea of a single god supporting a single monarch having great appeal. The arcane, once looked down upon with suspicion, was outlawed, and a once quiet purge of more tolerant elements within the church has been getting more and more brazen. Despite the best efforts of the throne, there are still distinct regional differences in the former kingdoms. Some of the territories, once controlled by the other kingdoms in the area before the Al-Sadan conquests, are traditionally more tolerant, but that has moved underground for fear of the inquisitors.